Someone once wrote that the eternal quest of the human being is to shatter his own loneliness. This album appears to be about connections between us, our living world, and even the band itself. It's a bit of a prog stew, to be honest with you. But is it any good? Let's find out, shall we? The Quest is an album that explores many of the challenges we now face amid the world around us. It deals with many numerous ethical conundrums, as well as exploring the relations we forge. The album also appears to be sonically unpicking what it is to be Yes, with the current incarnation, of course, digging their heels in and staking a claim to that specific moniker. There are, of course, those stalwarts of prog out there that insist that Yes without John Anderson is a bit like Hinge without Brackett. And perhaps this album is about attempting to win over hearts and minds. Maybe that's also part of the quest. That being said, I have to say there's some exquisite moments of yesness on this album. Steve Howe's playing alone just has the hair standing up on the back of your neck. Some wonderful keyboard parts by Jeff Downes, and Billy Sherwood certainly channels his inner Chris Squire. And Steve Howe's voice is used rather prominently on this. It's almost like a lower end murmur, over which is embellished, of course, by John Davison's ethereal trills. Nevertheless, it seems to work. The voices seem to blend rather well together. John Davison has insisted that this album, or if there's a central theme to this album, it's very much about striking a balance, or about establishing an equilibrium, I think. Steve Howe, being interviewed for this channel, has said that it's definitely not a concept album. And I have to agree, really, trying to find a thematic thread to cling to has been challenging for me. I always found that Yes's music was very much about a kind of spirituality, mysticism, an atmosphere, if you like. Trying to unpick those lyrics is like a Gordian knot. It's has you pounding the pavements at 3 a.m. trying to work out what it all means. But on this one, there are certain motifs explored, shall we say. Climate change is one that's explored on this record, as well as the threat to individual freedom posed by artificial intelligence in Minus the Man. I suspect John Davison has been reading way too much Isaac Asimov for this one. Nevertheless, I have to say that ethereal and choral-like voice of his wraps itself around some pretty compelling themes. It does seem to end on a note of optimism, of course, very singular message of hope, faith in ourselves and our humanity. Living Island, a song inspired by Barbados, of course, is this beautiful, beautiful island that needs protecting. Obviously, one can see that as a metaphor for our planet in general, and especially the need to safeguard something that's very, very precious, and all this emanates out of these wonderful cerulean shades of blue. Steve Howe said of this album, "The Quest is a strong album with a common theme, posing the great questions of life and finding that we have our destiny within our own hands." Overall, this album is an enjoyable listen. I found so much to like about it. It's certainly a much better album than 2014's Heaven and Earth, which was a bit insipid, if you ask me. I must admit, I loved the first track on that album, which I can never remember the title of. But overall, this album is much, much stronger. And a lot of that has to do with the production. The production on this is absolutely remarkable. It has a lot more punch, and it's much more arresting to actually listen to some of these songs, and the textures that are explored. The dynamic range and the diversity of themes and ideas is just absolutely wonderful. The songs are fairly short, certainly by prog standards, and they don't lose themselves amid this, mad prog obfuscation like some of the. It's not Porn Hearts or Topographic Oceans or anything like that. I mean, some of us perhaps wish that Yes would do something like that again, but nevertheless, it sits very favourably amid some of Yes's latter day albums. And there are lots of nods to classic Yes, which makes this a thoroughly rich and rewarding listen. And this sonic retrospection is very much apparent in Steve Howe's guitar parts, the way Billy Sherwood plays on this, and even Jeff Downes has said he's kind of been looking over his shoulder to see who's occupied that seat before him, employing many of the textures, that reminiscent of Tony Kaye. And it's all interwoven with these songs in not in a way that makes it rather clumsy and mawkish, but very much of a band identifying where they've come from and where they are now. It's all about acknowledging that journey. Maybe that's the quest. So with Steve Howe on form and Billy Sherwood playing the buggery out of that bass, and Jeff Downes does a wonderful job on this as well. John Davison's voice is very much a voice. It's almost become like a motif that we associate with Yes's music. But what is overlooked, I think, is his ability to write songs and some pretty interesting lyrics as well. I'll come to that in a minute. Even a song like the Ice Bridge. When that was released, I had some misgivings about that keyboard sound at the start. It sounded a little bit too much like Fanfare for a Common Man. But as soon as it starts and that bass comes in, those beautiful guitar trills from Steve Howe. Some of his guitar phrasing on this album are generally nourishing for the soul, as classic Yes always was. Listening to classic Yes is very much like a transcendent experience for me, and this album certainly has its peaks, which harkens back to that tradition. Although Woody Allen says that tradition is just the illusion of permanence. I often wonder if this is one of those lockdown albums, but Steve Howe insists that a lot of his parts were actually written before the dreaded lurgy struck. Alan White says of this album, Billy Sherwood and myself did all the rhythm sections, bass and drums in America, and I must admit White's drumming on this is particularly strong, which is going to please Yes fans everywhere. He goes on to say that this certainly helps when you've got a good place to work. But what are the tracks on this album? I made some notes as I've gone through them one by one. The Ice Bridge, of course, which now has a writing credit to Francis Monkman. I love the guitar lick, and the bass runs at the start of this one's very dramatic, emblematic of, as well as helping to create that sense of peril. There's a great line in this, the fear of extinction, we're pushed to the edge, we must stand unified, is another line, of course. It certainly very much speaks of a struggle that's at the very heart of our modern times. Dare to Know, Steve Howe's vocals are quite strong in the mix on this one, some interesting symphonic elements, and I have to say the acoustic section at the end of this is absolutely beautiful. Minus the Man is another intriguing one. Thematically and lyrically, it's absolutely fascinating, some wonderful guitar work throughout. It poses the question, is the key to our survival post-human technology? Of course, the very idea of our humanity being compromised by artificial intelligence is at the very centre of this one. And are we searching for an internal consciousness through technology? And the ideas of the Superman and the Superman minus a soul, perhaps. John Davison has been imbibing some pretty dystopian literature, I guess. The idea of us being replaced not by a superior race and Bowie's "Oh You Pretty Things," but more a technology of our own devising. Leave Well Alone has a funky vibe to it, and Jeff Downes' keyboards punctuate this. I shouldn't say it, but it reminds me of Michael Jackson's Thriller. Then it switches to primarily an acoustic reverie. Super lines like I Face the Virtue of Nothingness, and there's lots of nods to classic Yes in this specific number as well. One that poses a solution of just perhaps letting things be, and the mysticism of our universe is something to be accepted, perhaps. The Western Edge, We Are One Constellation, the Ocean of Humanity, lots of metaphors suggesting the need for connection, harmony, balance. Some interesting vocal interplay between Downes and Davison. They sound like a firm of solicitors. A powerful oceanic swell of music with Steve Howe's guitar just soaring above it. Future Memories is an incredibly beautiful song. I love the line, the mirror of the mind projecting. Those of you who don't know, there were times this year I was genuinely in fear of losing my wife, and this song profoundly affected me, especially the line, I don't want to make another memory without you. Quite devastating. Music to My Ears is an interesting one. It didn't strike me in the same way as some of the other numbers. Perhaps a number I need to listen to a lot more, I think. And A Living Island, of course, I've already touched upon this, but beautiful guitar phrasing as the island becomes a metaphor for the world we inhabit. One critic has pointed out that it feels more like an Asian number than a Yes number, and I have to agree really with that one. John Davison has said it's a poignant title to touch on the world as it was shutting down. Nevertheless, I think it presents challenges that can be overcome. This is an album that's replete with love songs, imaginative songs. There's certainly a lot to get our teeth into on this one. There are those, of course, that will insist that a Yes album without John Anderson is not a Yes album, although Yes have actually put albums out without John Anderson. Nevertheless, this incarnation of the band seem to be trying really hard is not only to make a damn good album, which I believe they have done, but to consolidate the current incarnation of this band with that classic Yes sound. It's not a perfect album. I think something like Close to the Edge is a perfect album. Dark Side of the Moon is a perfect album. It at times lacks that edge that we'd expect Classic Yes to have, but then, in all fairness, even Classic Yes at times lack that edge. Nevertheless, they've done a bloody good job, I have to say. It's a thoroughly enjoyable prog album. Anyway, I would recommend that you give this a listen. Anyway, it just leaves me to say I hope you're well and staying safe. More importantly, that you keep listening.